Hi there, motorhome owners. Today in your 2020 Ford F-53 chassis motorhome, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install Roadmaster's sway bar for the rear axle. And this is what our sway bar looks like when it's installed. This is an additional sway bar that we're putting on the rear axle here that works in conjunction with the factory sway bar. And you can actually see a little bit of the factory sway bar hanging down here. The factory sway bar is just on the front side of your rear axle, and the one that we're adding from Roadmaster here goes on the rear side of our rear axle. By adding an additional sway bar, we're going to get significant improvements in anti-sway, because whenever our motorhome wants to rock to the left or to the right, this component here wants to remain in its normal resting position that we've got it in here. So as our motorhome goes to maybe tilt to the left or to the right, maybe we'll say to the left, we had a heavy crosswind hit us and we're tilting, our body's tilting to the left now. What happens when your body tilts to the left, your axle's still flat on the road, but the body tilts. That means if we're tilting this direction, that means our driver's side here, the body's getting slightly closer to our axle and we're compressing those components. This arm here then is pushing downward on our sway bar. On the opposite side here, the opposite thing's happening. If it's tilting this direction, the body's going slightly further away from our axle over here. And that's going to cause this arm here to pull up on our sway bar. So now we've twisted our sway bar. Our sway bar does not want to do that. It wants to, again, be in this position. So it's going to push itself back to this position, bringing our motorhome back upright. This is going to minimize the distance our motorhome can sway. And it's going to also reduce the amount of back and forth oscillations you get, because if it starts to sway to the left, once it comes back down on center, that momentum's still there and it's going to push it to the right just a little bit, and you might get a couple back and forth before it settles out. The stronger we make it back here, the less of those we're going to have, and we could potentially eliminate it in certain situations where we had it before. Our sway bar is made of a very strong chromoly steel. We can see how thick it is here in comparison with my thumb. I would say this is probably close to 2 inches of meat that we've got here. And when you compare that to the factory one, the factory one's pretty beefy too, but I would say we've got at least a 1/4 inch of thickness. On the original factory one here, this one here is going to be larger than what our factory is. But we're going to get this in conjunction with that factory one, which is really nice. I like that Roadmaster has designed it in a way that we're able to keep this sway bar, because some other manufacturers that give you upgrades, they replace the factory sway bar with a heavier duty one. But you're only going to get the improvements of however strong that new bar is over your old one. With this one, we're going to add all of our benefits to that of the factory one here. So this is a really great way to go. If you are struggling with sway, some additional components you can add to further battle that are sway bars for the front axle. You can replace the front one with a Roadmaster. That is going to be a replacement to a heavier duty one. It's not just going to be an additional one like the one here in the rear is. And I would also recommend a set of Sumo springs. You can get those for both the front and the rear axle. They do a fantastic job combating sway and just helping to smooth out your ride and giving you some more control over your motorhome. For a full package, what I recommend to customers who's just really got a motorhome that they're struggling with, keeping it on the road, they're exhausted when they get to their destination because they're having to fight it so much, and they're just kind of bare knuckle on it because they're kind of scared of this thing and the way it's throwing them around on the road. So in addition to the front and rear set of sway bars and the Sumo springs, I'd also recommend a steering stabilizer from Roadmaster. Those can be installed up at the front, and if the steering wheel's not on center, it will help to pull it back to center to help it keep going straight down the road for you. And there's also a dampener on there, so if you hit any of the bumps and stuff on the road that would normally really jar that steering wheel, that dampener is going to help to reduce that, so you're not struggling so hard. And with these sway bars and Sumo springs, the motorhome's not going to be rocking as much. It's really going to make a big difference in taming these big old beasts. We'll begin our installation here on the rear axle. You'll notice at the wheel here I can spin it. We used our leveling jacks as well as some pads from UltraFab that we've got here. You can get those here at eTrailer. We put those underneath our leveling jacks that just let us lift up our motorhome a little bit higher, and we were able to get it to where the wheels are off the ground. Now, they don't have to be completely off the ground like this, but it does need to be lifted up high enough here in the back for you to access the two bolts that our component's going to attach to. Because in its normal resting position with the suspension fully loaded, the leaf springs will go right in front of your bolts and you won't be able to remove those. Once you've got it lifted up with your leveling jacks or however you want to lift it at home, with what you've got there, make sure you are supporting the frame with some jack stands. You never want to work on your vehicle with just the hydraulic supports holding it up. So here we are in the wheel well now. These are the two bolts we were referring to. Here's the leaf spring we were talking about. So you can see if the suspension wasn't hanging or if it wasn't at least lifted up some, you'd never be able to pull these out because they wouldn't clear the leaf spring. Once you've got it lifted up though, just grab a 21mm socket and zip these out of here. You don't need to put a wrench on the other side because the nuts have a little tang on them that prevents them from spinning. And then nuts they'll usually just fall down just like that. There we go. Now that we got both of those loose, all the way loose, we can pull it out of there if we want to. We're gonna do the same thing on the other side to get those loose, and then we'll grab our brackets and head underneath. So we're just sliding those out. We'd already loosened them up. Take your bracket here. This is gonna go up here and line up with your bolt holes. So that's just gonna slide through, slide your other one through. And then these are the nuts that we'd remove. So there's that tang that we showed you. So when you go to put these on, you're just gonna set it up against the back of the bolt here, and you're gonna have to spin the bolt to go into the nut because of that tang. And now we're just gonna go back and tighten those down with the same size socket. You don't need to hold the back side because of that tang. After you get it snugged down on there, you're gonna tighten the other side the same way. We're gonna switch over to a torque wrench and then torque them to the specifications outlined in our instructions. Once you get both of your brackets torqued down, at that point you can go ahead and go underneath your motorhome. You don't need it lifted anymore, so you can lower down your leveling jacks. Now at this point you might want to go ahead and just leave it supported so that way you got more room to work down here. We went ahead and put ours on our lift, and our lift lifts it by the wheel, so ours is completely loaded, so it's as if it was sitting on the ground, but that one's not going to change anything until we get to a much later step. So next thing we're going to do is get some hardware fed in, and we're going to feed it into the shock mount right here where our shock attaches at the bottom. You'll see it's got some holes right here in the bottom of it. You're going to have different hardware for the front and the back hole. The one closer to the shock is going to get the button head one. So, and it's also going to get the washer that has the slit in it like that. Slide your washer on that, and then this is going to drop down through the hole closest to the shock here. And you may or may not need to remove your shock bolt to install this. On ours, we can reach right around it and put it in there with no problem, so we don't need to take that shock bolt out. And there's kind of an opening right over here that you can go up to drop your bolt down. There we go. And now we got both of those dropped down. So we're gonna go ahead and move straight into the bar and get that in place. So go ahead and grab your bushings. We'll need to lubricate these and also grab your bar because we're gonna try to do this quickly and try not to get the grease that you're gonna lubricate these with all over the place. So grab just the bushings and then grab your bar. This is the lubricant that you get in your kit. Some customers have expressed that they get irritation from the lubricant, so you may want to use some gloves when you go to apply this. I've not noticed any issues personally, so I'm just going to have a napkin here to clean myself up. We're going to grab a generous amount of it there, and we're going to lubricate the inside of our bushing. We want to get it nice and lubricated all the way around. I like to take this little tiny bit that's left and put it on the outside. We really don't want a lot of grease here on the outside, but this little tiny excess bit that's on your finger here can just help to minimize any squeaks and noises that your sway bar can produce. After you've got it well lubricated, it's a split bushing, so you simply open it up and we'll slide it over the end there. We're going to do the same thing with our other bushing and place it on the other side. We can then take our caps and just slide those on our bushings. Now it's not uncommon when you go to lift this up here, these caps like to slide off the bushing, but we're going to be lifting it up here to install it, so it's, if you can, maybe support them to keep them from falling off. We're also going to grab some of our hardware out of here, so we've got that prepared as well, because this thing's pretty heavy. So it's good to have things kind of right next to you so you're ready to go. So I'm just grabbing all the nuts and washers out of here, so that way I've got everything that I need when I lift it up. So now we're just lifting it up into position, trying to get those bolts to drop down through our bushings. Do that on each side there. And if you can kind of brace your body under it. And then each one of these is going to get a washer and a nut. And just repeat that for all your hardware. So we can now go back and tighten these down. We're going to use a 7/32 Allen and a 15mm socket. And we'll get those snug down. When tightening down the bolts towards the front, you're just going to use a 15mm socket and a wrench. And there's a little slot on the side you should be able to go in to get your wrench in there. And once you got them snug down, we can go back and torque these to the specifications outlined in our instructions. Once those are tightened down, we can figure out which hole is going to be the most appropriate hole for our hanger. And the way we're going to do that is hold our sway bar up until it's level. We want this arm to be parallel with the ground here. And we want to see where that lines up. And it looks like for us, that's just going to be, looks like the bottom hole on each side is going to put us where we're pretty much level with the ground there. So now that we know where we're going to put it, I like to hang the top first and then swing the sway bar up into these. So now we'll take our hanger here. This is just going to slide up between there. We know which hole it is now. Our bolts here are going to slide from the outside in. These are the longer, larger bolts in your kit. Gets a little stiff, might have to tap it a little bit. And we'll put our nut on the other side there. And then we're going to get the other side hung just like that. So now we're just bringing this up till it's parallel there. Rock that in place. We already verified which was the most appropriate hole, so we're just sliding our bolt from the outside towards the inside here and putting a nut on it. Check our other side, make sure everything lined up okay over here, and do the same thing. Sometimes you gotta shimmy the sway bar just a little tiny bit to center it left and right. There we go. And get our nut on it. And now we'll go back and snug these down. We're gonna use a 15/16 socket and wrench, or if you're using metric 24mm, a very similar size. And these don't get a huge amount of torque. Yeah, see, there we go. Once you've got all of your hardware tightened and torqued, that'll complete your installation. At this point, you just want to take it out for a quick spin. If you hear any noises or clunks, just double check your hardware and make sure that you do have them all properly tightened down. And that completes our installation of Roadmaster sway bar for the rear axle on our 2020 Ford F-53 chassis motorhome.